Another week's gone by, folks. Glad to have you back. How you doing? My name's Darryl. This is your first time joining us. Welcome to the show. Of course, I know most of you there are repeat listeners, and I love the fact that you come back week after week. What's the best thing, folks, that's happened to you this week? Top of mind, think about it. What is it? Is it a family thing? Is it a work thing? Did you have a victory? Maybe the first thing, I asked you for the best thing, what comes to mind is actually a challenge, a frustration you have. Ever have those challenges, those frustrations, and you think, that sucked. I could have done that so much better. That's what life is about, isn't it, right? We kind of have our highs and we have our lows. And it's amazing how often the highs and the lows go together. Have you ever noticed that? It's like, if you're selling and you have a killer day, you do all the calls, you have like a gazillion conversations, everybody's answering the phone, everybody's replying to email, your LinkedIn post is getting massive traffic. It's a good day. And then just, late in the day, boom, you get that notification that big deal you're planning on just fell through. You lost it to the competition, to no decision, to no budget, whatever it might be. It's gone. And it just spoils it. With the highs come the lows. It is such a fact of life. And how we manage that has a dramatic impact on our success. And managing it is kind of interesting because there's how you manage it. How does it affect you? I've talked to people before. I had Denny Champagne on not too long ago. He mentioned Zig Ziglar, and I told a story about how Zig, when I was early days of selling, I listened to a recording of his, and he made a comment about, when you drive down the road and that car cuts you off and you're yelling at them and you're cursing at them and you're angry at them, you're driving aggressively because of them, that car is absolutely oblivious. They've actually gone boom on with their day. You've had zero impact on them, but they've had an impact on you. So clearly in that example, I didn't handle it well. I chose to give control to somebody else. And that's what it's all about. It's how you handle it. Now, there's also others, right? There's loved ones. There's professional colleagues. How they handle it can be very annoying and frustrating. So, for example, what I just said to you, you lost that deal. Or maybe it's a no decision or it's a delayed decision. Maybe the rest of the company's going, oh, we were counting on that number. We were counting on that deal to hit our quota. Oh, it's a strategic account. Oh, you suck. Whatever it might be. But inside, it's okay. I got this. I anticipated this. I got the backup plan in effect. Just chill, guys. Just relax. Leave it with me. So, but the fact is, those people and their reaction put stress and anxiety on you and maybe throws you off your game. Whether it's life or work, but of course, this is the inside sales show. So it's always going to be about work. How you handle things in your environment and in your situation, how you manage those around you who influence you has a direct impact on your success. So I'll give you an example. I remember one time going into a new job, and if you heard the story before, I apologize. I sometimes tell stories over again, as you know. And I was young, and I was feeling pretty good. I'd got the life was going good. We'd moved back near family from being away for a long time. We had our first child, got a killer job at a killer high-tech company. It was still small with a big future. And I was the first head of marketing, not a sales analogy, but hear me out. It works out the same. And the boss who had hired me basically after the first day just kind of abandoned me. And not that he was malicious and he wasn't being rude to me. He was a very nice guy. He had other things to do. And I was just this token hire, and he had to hire me because that's what you do. And he left me alone. And I stumbled for 3 months, desperately looking for feedback and guidance and direction, and more getting frustrated with a lack of input, a lack of feedback with what I was doing, and never knowing if I was doing it right. I'm sure some of you can relate to that. Always worried you're doing it wrong because you're not getting feedback. So why don't they give you feedback? Have they already written you off? Or have you misrepresented? Are they not happy? And finally, at the 3-month mark, I was ready to quit. And I remember at that point in time, we were doing an advertisement campaign, and I gave it to my boss. I said, what do you think of this comp? And he said, well, I'll get back to you tomorrow. So he comes back the next day, and he had said he talked to his wife, and his wife thought the color it needed more purple. That was his feedback. I'm not making this up. And, it wasn't what was the message, what was the visual, what was the call to action. It was his wife, not him, thought it needed more purple. And that's when I knew that this wasn't going to work out for me. Or if it was, that I needed to take charge, because I had to eliminate the external factors that were threatening my success and just own it. And if I still got canned in the process, I knew, head held high, that I had done everything I could, and I had done what I thought was right. That's a startup. Sales is no different. Imagine you're going into a company that's a fairly new company, high-tech company, and you're their first sales hire. A lot of pressure on you from investors and the developers and the CEO, the founder, call it what you will. And, they're tech guys. They might know their product, they might know their space, but they don't necessarily know how to drive revenue. And you are the first person. What do? You don't have the same budget. You don't have the resources. There's no sales enablement training program in place. Content probably doesn't exist. How are you going to succeed as a sales professional in that environment? Because you want to, because it's sexy, because it's fun. It's an adventure, but you are on your own, just like I was at that high-tech company. And that's where my good friend Scott Berty comes in. Scott Berty is the Chief Growth Officer at Trufan. That's Trufan. And it's a pretty cool startup. It's a platform that actually equips brands. So think like major brands, maybe it's Nike or Coca-Cola. Maybe it's, the Toronto, the championship winning Toronto Raptors. So lots of brands. It's a platform that equips brands with data that activates a grassroots community of micro influencers or super fans. So I know I'm Canadian. The Raptors just won this year the championship in the NBA, and there was one guy who was a super fan that everybody rallied around. He'd been there from the beginning. He was visible. Everybody knew him. They see him on the street. Trufan is all about finding more of those people to grow your brand. It's a pretty hot space, especially as you see the power of social media and everything else. As the society becomes more divided, more partisan, that's what Trufan is. Scott was hired to make that company rock, and along the way, he's faced his own sales challenges. Scott, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Darryl. That was a nice, warm lead up. Do you have those introductory kind of like story sessions each show?
Yeah, no, I try to have them every 5-6 minutes. Some people wish I was a lot shorter. I actually had a conversation the other day with our podcast editor. I started, finding my rhythm on the show several months ago, and he and I hadn't talked in months, right? Because we produce it, we flip it to him, he does the editing, he posts it, and away we go. And so we had a chance to catch up recently, and I said, "Hey, have you noticed that's what we're doing now?" And his comment was, "I did." And I said, "What do you think?" And he goes, "At first, I thought it was ego. I thought it was just you wanting to hear yourself." And I said, "Okay, I didn't see that coming." But I love that he was so honest with me, right? And I said, "It's not." He goes, No. He goes, "I love it now." He goes, because he edits every one. He goes, "I love it." He goes, "Actually, that's my best part of the editing process is I love hearing your stories." He goes, "No, not a lot of people do that." He goes, "But at first I wasn't sure." So just goes to show you in the kind of situation you're in. You just never know what sometimes people, how, you do something with the best of intentions.
Yeah.
And it doesn't always work out.
Well,
so talk to me about, go ahead.
And without talking about your show too much and the way you do it, it's a good way to start the show because it lends itself to giving people the inspiration to think about perspective, I think. And like the whole perspective aspect of whatever be life, sales, work, you kind of talked about the two different silos. It plays a key role in the growth of anybody, I do believe, is the ability to kind of like look at different experiences, whether they're your own or whether they're, executives like yourself, people that we look up to, mentors, public figures, just as perspective. And they can dramatically, I think, attribute to where your future goes, whether it be career or life oriented. And have a lot of impact on the results and success you may have over time as well. So it made me think about a lot of things there. On the challenges side, like it seems like the last several weeks I've been thinking about how I could have spent a little more time setting my fantasy lineup. And that is, that little bit of time is resulting in some L's the last few weeks. So trying to decide on how much more time I should ramp up on the fantasy efforts. And then so too on the sales and work side, I wanted to talk about one quick thing there is, when I was working, probably the earliest form of sales I ever did more in a direct capacity is like actually direct sales, or referred to as direct marketing, but selling items that people are coming into stores not expecting to see. So basically just crap off the shelves. But when I was in that role, they did have a number of different marketing systems that they relied on. And then one of the things that factored into it was how you always want to leave life at the door, or kind of personal stuff at the door, because oftentimes I feel like one of the biggest negatives that can plague, whether it be salespeople or professionals, is their day-to-day life and their personal life that may kind of trickle in through the door with them to their desk, and with them when they're on the phones and different things of that nature, which can ultimately have a very negative effect on the outcomes of those efforts, and really a negative effect on the surrounding employees, the culture, and different things of that nature. So they always kind of talked about leaving the personal stuff at the door. And that's a skill that many don't have, actually. I've realized over the course of time. It's kind of one of the reasons I feel blessed to work in a startup is two are often combined into one, life and work, in that stage. So you don't think about those things as much, but I think people are naturally driven more by the work than anything else. So that often is their life outside of work, is more work. And in a corporate world, boy, you can really get caught up in that. So yeah, some good thoughts. I just had to kind of get those out there as you got me thinking.
Well, let me ask you this. Let's start the stage. So for those who are listening, who are at a startup, or it is called an early stage company, even if it's not truly a startup, and maybe the team isn't big, maybe they're the only ones, or maybe they have aspirations of joining a company like that. You've gone through that. So when you took on that role, I'm kind of curious, what were the expectations placed upon you? What did you have? What did you walk into, if anything, as far as systems or processes in our install base? And where did you start?
It's a good question. It's probably a little bit different than most people that may get hired into a startup to grow maybe their sales efforts, or to lead their sales efforts and their sales team. For me, because at the time of joining, I was more or less part of the founding team. To kind of give you a bit of the backstory. So as you know, I was kind of very active on LinkedIn, and saw, I guess through a personal lens, some ability to grow personally and professionally through that platform, and the kind of means that they were providing any professional out there, which is really just a lot of organic content reach. And so through that, I ended up meeting Swish, who's the founder and CEO over there. We started talking about the idea a little bit back and forth through, this would have been November, early December 2017. And then, when he was kind of committed to having me be a part of that project, and I had committed myself to, I'm really trying to own that project and saying like, hey, this is something, that I know based off my external kind of career circumstances, that I know I want to put my effort and passion into, kind of make some of my life's work. So once we saw eye to eye there, helped create some of the initial content for the first website in December 2017. He brought in some of the other ears that he had been speaking with from around the world about that particular project and startup is January of 2018, so the start of the next year. And we started doing team calls after that. So I guess speaking a little to like the expectations that were placed upon me, and when we finally figured out the core team, or the kind of core founding team, which would have been probably mid-February, and that was around the same time that I quit my full-time job to focus on the startup. There wasn't really that much expectation. It was more so the expectation that we were all going to do the work that we saw needed to kind of push things always to, whether it be the next level or the next piece of content, whatever it may be, but ultimately just keep moving things forward. And I was brought in, or we kind of decided as my title for the head of sales position. So somebody who would ultimately kind of lead our sales efforts, lead the growth of any sort of sales team. So there could have been expectations, whether it be on the hiring side or right through to revenue. But at that time as well, like even when I had a title, we had nothing to sell. So that also comes into play on like the type of expectations that can be set. A lot of my work kind of got spread across marketing, copywriting, content related things. I continued to be active on LinkedIn. I think that was inevitably an expectation at the start. So yeah, I'd say that's kind of the situation that I got into. How it's grown since then is certainly the expectations continue to grow, and you kind of touched on it, whether it be internally or through the stakeholders that include advisors, investors, and even customers. But It's been an interesting path, and I'm sure we can kind of dive deeper into it, but it's definitely different, I think, than most. And if people do get hired directly into a position when things are already off the ground, and maybe those more traditional tech founders have already built the product, which wasn't really the case in our scenario, it can be a lot different. And you know what I mean? Like those expectations could even be linked to like a 3-month trial term where, hey, if they're not really seeing the numbers that you'd expect by the end of that 3 months, they could be at the door. So I guess I was lucky in that position.
All right, fast and furious. I got about 4 or 5 things I want to nail here before we run out of time. First off, so you finally, the company matures. You're trying to break into accounts to get revenue. Did you have existing tools, CRM, conversational analytics, video, LinkedIn Navigator? Did you have any tools when you started?
When we started, I started out administering the freemium version of HubSpot. So we did have the CRM. Getting buy-in across the organization was probably the most difficult challenge I had to face and that I continue to face. Just given the fact that we're still considerably smaller team and some of the responsibilities as it relates to sales do kind of leak into almost everyone's role to some capacity. And it's something that we're slowly trying to change. But getting that buy-in is absolutely critical for anybody out there who's kind of in that position of implementing those systems. And maybe getting that agreement first before you even start to implement something could be worth your while. So you're not wasting time. They're ultimately affecting your own happiness and that time you're putting in. But yeah, we had that. Certainly that kind of links to their marketing automation system. We had a little bit of capabilities through there. When we passed the MVP, we actually were part of a little incubator, or we had free office space through Hootsuite at that time. So HubSpot also has a startup program that any other person who's been in a startup that's gone through an accelerator or an incubator, pretty much anywhere globally, can apply for. And so at the time when we kind of really turned the lights on and actively tried to start selling it, we did go through that program, which gave us 90% off their professional suites. So $1,600 worth of software for $160 a month. That's incredible savings. And then the follow-up 2 years, we're now on 75% off for the next 2 years. So that's a great deal that people out there should look into. On the note of other tools, I think it's mainly Slack. We've always had great use for communication and trying to segment that. We've added video, email. So like using, in our case, we use, is it Loom? We use a bit of Loom, but we also use Dub is the other one. It's a pretty cost-effective video calling platform, video email platform, similar to Vidyard that I know you guys use at VanillaSoft. But yeah, those tools have been really helpful.
All right, so now you got your tech stack in place, so now you're equipped. Now you're trying to break into accounts, and you're a startup. So really, you guys have, let's say, minimal existing brand. Your customer base is still small and emerging. What challenges did you have breaking into those accounts, and what did you do to overcome those challenges?
So I think part of what we did initially was try to validate the MVP as much as we could. It wasn't so much about how we could increase our revenues pretty substantially, like within the first few months of having an actual product, but it was really getting the feedback from the customers or the users. So pushing it out into kind of our warm network and really seeing on a high level, bigger brands, like what sort of connections that we already had would be intrigued with the platform and interested in potentially using it or adopting it internally, and starting out with just having them test the platform and actually use it. So there's a little bit of that. On the other side of things, we're looking at potential bigger accounts and a little bit more strategically on if we were to spend our time targeting a few different clients, whatever, maybe a group of 10 to 20 to 30, what 10 to 30 clients or prospects would be worth our time exploring at that stage, like who we know would ultimately have alignment with the product and some synergies there. But even more so, knowing it might be a little bit of a longer sales cycle, like making sure we were kind of supplementing that with a customer that was actually going to give us the type of revenue we were hoping for at the end of the day, which didn't always work, but definitely looking for some potential like larger customers, and even more so in the sense of like partnerships, people who really wanted to support the growth of the product, not just buy it. in a sense. So that was something that I looked for early on. I think the way we'd go about doing that for the most part was leveraging each other's relationships. Swish had a number of connections on LinkedIn that we could kind of either go through for potential introductions or just looking out at warm connections that he would already have. Same thing with myself, and finding some of those early adopters at that point, I think, is the biggest key. So the more you can kind of approach that in terms of like potential partnerships, I think, rather than customers, is a great idea. And then ultimately trying to build relationships with some of those other people who are more so testing the product over the course of time, so that there does come a time where they feel enough confidence in you as a kind of partner and a vendor that it's a no-brainer. They're more interested in buying the product rather than you having to sell it to them.
All right. So what I'm hearing a lot from here is you relied heavily on social, heavily on personal relationships, or even just based on reputation. You knew of each other and you thought highly of each other. And then part of your job really wasn't just to be a sales development rep or an account executive. It was also to be a relationship manager to grow those into new opportunities. All right. What tactics did not work? Did you try the phone? Did you try email?
Yeah, we've done and continue to do a lot of both of those. I mean, I try to use the phone as much as I can. It's sometimes difficult when you do have a number of other relationships that you're kind of moving along the pipeline. You're trying to fit in that time for prospecting. I do make times for it. Over the course of time, what we've done, especially since I hired our first business development manager, going back to May, was we'd set aside a time like twice a month or so and just kind of call it a sales grind, where everybody's in a room the entire day, whatever, you get out for lunch or something like that, like go and take your resets. But for the most part, we're just in there kind of banging the phones, building out new prospect lists. And, at some point in time, we also added Discover Org. So having that as a prospecting tool to kind of shorten the time that's needed to acquire those lists of buyers, incredibly helpful. We haven't seen a tremendous return on that yet, I would say. The email side of things, we've done a little bit of outbound. We've seen some success come through that. We've had some leads like Groupon and some others come through those types of channels on outbound email campaigns, and then just kind of coming back through either from a link through our website or one of the CTAs that were included in the emails. But one or two of the things that I would encourage other people out there to think about, one of the things that we're going to be testing come 2020 is going to be some direct mail campaigning. So not initially for like cold prospects, but thinking about it like after you've reached somebody, whether that be like through an email campaign that you're highly interested in actually getting in front of, or somebody that you've already given a demo to, they're maybe a little bit stagnant. They've gone back to like talk to a couple of other executives or senior leadership internally. And it seems to be kind of bottlenecking that deal. Like, how can you slowly push some of those through the funnel and finesse them through? We're going to try and use direct mail. It's something that I heard has been working wonders for some B2B companies out there, accounting for like almost half of their deal flow. And then another thing would be events. I think like the more you can leverage very cost-effective events to get out there in front of a number of different people, but just have you there, whether it be 3 days in consistency or the one day of that event, even if you're just there as like somebody who's participating in the event and networking, it's just an amazing way to reach a lot of people in a short period of time. And it may not always come out of that with like a dozen leads, but even 2 highly qualified leads can be better than spending a full day on the phone. So
you finally get their attention, no matter how you got it, and now you're being considered. At that consideration stage, what have you learned as kind of a guerrilla startup, sales growth officer to bring that deal across, the finish line?
Probably the biggest lesson is not like unless you're in a situation where there's somebody on the other side that is highly committed to adopting the technology into either their workflow or their employees' workflow, not giving them that tool for free with some sort of free trial. I know you've actually spoken about how you guys are kind of moving away from free trials a little bit or testing that. For us, it was just a major difference in the sense that we'd have so many nice potential buyers that are, supporting our product and kind of giving it some great feedback. But at the end of the day, were they really interested in buying it? You can get really stuck up at those points with a number of different buyers if you're not really clear about the expectation for you, right, as the kind of supplier, as the technology vendor. And so we moved to more of a paid pilot style of kind of pushing them through the funnel towards the end if they weren't totally committed to more of a long-term deal off the bat. And that helped to eliminate any of those people who at any point in time, they won't be signing some long-term contract because they were just not interested in actually buying the product. Maybe they didn't have the budget. Maybe they weren't the one who can sign off, but you know what I mean? It helps accelerate that deal. And then thinking about the actual pipeline more and more as we kind of move forward and trying to refine certain actions that need to be taken to move people through the pipeline, and things like that, like having certain qualifying questions that have been answered much earlier on, or making sure that certain people are part of the conversation much earlier on to prevent that bottlenecking towards the end of that pipeline. So and the buyer's journey. So yeah, that I would say that's the biggest thing, is really just trying to set the expectation that the product's going to cost something at the end of the day. It's great to have users, but we're a SaaS company, so we're not really looking for that consumer market. And if you make it seem like people can start onboarding your products for next to nothing, that's what they're going to want to do.
Would you have had that attitude 2 years ago? Because you sounded like, to me, you were like, I'm worth this. If you're not really wanting to spend this, then no, thanks, but no thanks, I'm moving on. Would you have had that kind of mentality 2 years ago, or have you developed that?
No, I think I've developed a lot of this mentality that I have now. It's really just about the experiences that I've gone through, and being part of a startup from really like the very beginning to where we are now, and still knowing that there's so much more progress to be made. You almost come out of it with like an MBA, specifically, majoring in startups, I suppose. But there's just so much that you can learn when you're actually executing and kind of dealing with like you said, those ebbs and flows that happen so frequently together. Like there'd be months over the course of the past year where, for 2-3 months concurrently, like I'm closing deals left, right, and center. It seems like no day can end on a bad note. And then it'll be like, talk about days, like these stretches could go on for days, weeks, months, even sometimes over the last year, where it's like, oh my God, like last month I was absolutely killing it. I cannot seem to push somebody through to a close for the life of me this month. And you kind of look back, you evaluate, what have I been doing potentially that I could be doing different? Like, are there things on the product side that we still haven't been addressing that could be holding these deals up? There's a number of different places that you can go to, not necessarily a lot blame, but trying to evaluate where you can tighten things up. And I think that's what I try to do now more than anything. And that's as a result of the mindset that I've kind of created for myself over the last year. So a lot of learning. In 1 minute or less, for somebody who's in your shoes now, or is in your shoes a year, previous, in other words, where they are now is where you were a year ago or 18 months ago. You look back upon what you've done, Chief Growth Officer, coming in to an early stage company. What one thing do you highly recommend they do, and what mistake can they avoid? If you're in the position where you're managing a bit more of the process, and not just some of the day-to-day on the sales side, I would definitely encourage you to make sure that anybody around you who is also helping with sales is buying into the process that you've created, which either links back to the CRM or any sort of admin dashboard that you may have built into the platform, but ultimately a way of tracking all the different conversations through a pipeline, and making sure that each call, like each activity metric, is being tracked. Because at the end of the day, it's so much easier to go back and try and figure out how you can improve, where you can improve, when you have that data to report on. And it's going to be easier when your CEO is asking you why certain leaps and bounds haven't been made. And then I think if you're in the position where you're more so on the sales side directly, I think look at the tools that a lot of people aren't using. Sales Navigator on LinkedIn can be interesting, but I think LinkedIn as a platform just has a tremendous amount of white space still. And I would imagine if you compare yourself to 100 other reps in your same industry, potentially within the same type of product line, 90% of them, if not more, are not actively posting on LinkedIn. So that's one way you can differentiate yourself in a major way. Love it. All right. So that was something different, folks. A little bit of a startup spirit. Because the challenges are different there than they are in a more mature company. You have less resources, less budget, less staff, and in some regards, almost more heat, because it's do or die when you're that young. My guest today, if you don't recall, Scott Berty, Chief Growth Officer from Trufan. Check them out. He is, I can tell you this for a fact, best reached on LinkedIn, although he's really good at responding to text too, but hey, I guess you need to have his number for that. Scott, thank you so much for your time today, sir. Thanks, Darryl. Appreciate you having me on, man. That, my friends, is another episode of Inside Sales. We hope you had fun today. I had a blast. I'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.